Welcome to China Tech Talk, the weekly discussion of technology and startups here in China. I am John Artman, editor-in-chief of Technode.com, as always joined by Matthew Brennan, founder of China Channel. So this week we had the pleasure to welcome onto the show Victor Tseng, the CCO at Ctrip, to talk about a little bit about their company, but then also, of course, what they're doing globally, which is kind of where a lot of his responsibilities lie. And I think, again, this is super interesting to see, this trend of Chinese companies riding the wave of kind of the Chinese economy and the Chinese consumer going out. And so they're not. It's kind of an interesting kind of relationship between the business and the consumer, and to see how they're able to leverage consumer habits and consumer expectations to expand their businesses outside of China.
Yeah, and Ctrip is actually, it's an interesting company because it's one of the oldest internet companies of scale in China. It's been around for ages, as we go on to discuss in the podcast. They IPO'd really early before 2003, which was before the big giants actually. So they've been in the market for a long time, very mature company. Actually, one of the few Chinese big tech names that is headquartered in Shanghai. I can't think of too many others that are headquartered in Shanghai. Victor's at the forefront of the company right now, and they're pushed to internationalize, and there's a huge wave of interest in China outbound tourism. I think this episode is a little bit, again, we're delving into a sort of a different topic here with travel, not something we usually cover, but there is a lot of interest internationally about this sector because it's just there's really strong growth, and as everyone will know in different parts of the world, there's just Chinese tourists popping up everywhere.
Exactly. Yeah, it's funny because I was actually just in Thailand for the TechSauce conference in the middle of June, and I was talking to some friends there some of whom have been living there for quite some time, and they mentioned how the loud and brash American tourists are being displaced by the loud and brash Chinese tourists. And so definitely, I mean, I think that if you go anywhere around the world, you're going to see Chinese tourists more and more. And of course, there's some very interesting debates locally online about how Chinese people should act while they are abroad. But kind of going back to what you were saying just now, Matt, I mean, I think given the current market situation with mobile payments, with all these O2O applications, and how there's transactions are fairly frictionless at this point. It's it was kind of surprising to be reminded, just as you said, just how old Ctrip is and how long that they've been around. I mean, they were able to establish an online business without mobile payments. And I think, for us now, that seems like, wow, I mean, how is it even possible? But they did it. I think it's really kind of interesting to remember how, the Chinese ecosystem was not always like it is right now. And that, it was very possible for companies to do exceedingly well without that type of infrastructural support.
Yeah, well, they're coming from the desktop era, and from a time where the user base of people just who had access to the internet in China was a magnitude smaller than it is today. So very different times, and yeah, this was back I think I was in China during this time, but it would have been 2004, 2000. Yeah, I was in China 2004, but so I remember Ctrip in the very early days of being in China, and people. It was quite exciting to have a company like that, where they actually, I think, pretty early on they had English language support, call centers and stuff, which for expats like us was pretty early for that kind of stuff. There wasn't too many services that had English language on them.
Mm. Yeah, and also I remember actually seeing someone from Ctrip years and years and years ago. I think this must have been back in 2009 at a conference talking about the number of bookings that were done via phone. So even though they had the website, most people still didn't trust the website, and so they felt much more comfortable using the phone. And again, it's just amazing to see how far we've come. But we don't want to go into nostalgia too much. Victor gives us a lot of information about kind of where they come from, but then also really kind of dives deep into where they're going and their strategy for their global expansion. And so with that, we give you Victor Tseng. All right. Well, Victor, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to have this opportunity.
So one of the first questions that we like to ask guests onto the show is what's your China story? So, give us a brief introduction of yourself, your background, and how you came to join Ctrip.
Yeah, so I grew up in the U.S. in the West Coast. So after I finished my undergrad, came out to Asia. This was back in early 2000. So initially, I was in Taiwan for a couple of years doing venture capital. Obviously, I think mainland China is a great opportunity. You wanted to take the opportunity to learn more about the mainland China, and decided to pursue my graduate program out in Beijing at Tsinghua University. So I spent about 2 years out there between 04 and 06 at Tsinghua. A great experience. And after that, joined Deutsche Bank in Hong Kong as their lead China internet analyst. So that's how I kind of got involved more with mainland China, particularly within the internet sector. So this was back in 06 when I started looking at the China internet sector. So was at that Deutsche Bank for a couple of years leading up the China internet coverage, and then jumped over to Baidu for a couple of years, driving more external communication as well as helping Baidu expand internationally. And then when I was actually at Deutsche Bank, I was covering Ctrip already back then in the early days. And that's how I got to know Ctrip and the China travel space. And, so after Baidu, I was in the private sector for a couple of years. And then about a year ago, I had an opportunity to join Ctrip. So took that opportunity. I think Ctrip is in a very compelling kind of position, being in a travel space where the rising disposable income of the Chinese can ride on the rising disposable income of the Chinese consumer base, as well as particularly a lot of these Chinese are spending this money outbound, going to overseas destination that Ctrip is facilitating more and more. So this really underpins, Ctrip is in a unique position to really grab this opportunity to help it expand, globally. Right? So those are some of the sort of, and I know Ctrip intimately for quite a long time, and it was this opportunity to join Ctrip about a year ago, and then particularly interested in the global expansion of this company.
Yeah, so I guess that's kind of the question, right? I mean, what made you want to join Ctrip?
Yeah, so I think couple folds. I think for one is just the rising disposable income of the Chinese population. There more and more disposable income. I think travel is a big spending category. Travel typically represents about 10% of GDP, right? So it's a very, very big spending category. I think the travel vertical is unique in that there's a lot of ways for a vertical player to really add value, right? I think if you think about travel, it's usually a pretty high ASP item, right? People spend a couple thousand RMB for domestic travel. Typically, they spend up to 10,000 RMB plus for outbound travel. So it's a high ASP. So there's an expectation on service level, right? I think the travel space itself, in terms of really getting the supply chain right, and certain verticals like hotel, local attraction and destination kind of capabilities. It's these categories are very fragmented, very unstandardized. So there's a lot of opportunity for a vertical player to really deepen its core competence through better linkage of this supply chain, as well as really enabling the service capabilities. right? So I think Ctrip definitely has this core foundation and DNA since its founding to really compete and differentiate in this kind of vertical, right? But last but not least, so obviously, this international story for Ctrip, right? I think for many Chinese companies, building a presence internationally is inherently hard, right? And likewise, I think for Ctrip, there's still a lot of work to do. But I think there's a couple of different, unique attributes that Ctrip can leverage to help it expand internationally. First and foremost is just the continued wave of Chinese outbound travel, right? Obviously, Ctrip services a lot of this Chinese outbound travel, right? And that is already very big, right? Last year, Chinese traveling overseas, there's about 130 million trips made, right? They brought about 115 billion USD of spend. So in terms of trips made, it's already the world's largest, right? In terms of spend, it's already one of the world's largest in terms of, the spending power. And Ctrip facilitates a lot of this opportunity. So by bringing, more and this spend right now in China, this 115 billion USD spend is represented by less than 10% of the Chinese population, right? So if you think 5 years down the line, this number will probably multiple magnitudes bigger, right? Just because I think more and more Chinese having passports. I think overseas destinations and countries recognizing the spending power will continue to ease visa restrictions and application process for Chinese traveling to their destination. Right? These are all important kind of ingredients to facilitate more and more outbound travel going forward. So outbound travel is a very exciting kind of opportunity, and Ctrip sort of sits at the forefront of this opportunity. So by bringing this outbound travel overseas allows Ctrip to build up its international presence, particularly on the supply chain side, right? Building up the more flight relationship, more hotel relationship, more and more other travel related categories like train, ground transportation, restaurants, and so on and so forth, right? So I think to me that's super exciting, and then that's why kind of joined this company about a year ago.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we definitely want to talk a little bit more about later. The kind of the efforts that you guys are putting into outbound travel, and then also that international expansion. But before we get too deep into that, we kind of want to take a little bit of a step back, because I think most of our listeners are probably fairly familiar with Ctrip. I mean, and at the very least, they know that Ctrip is a pretty big player in the travel space, but they may not be too familiar with the background. So can you give us just a summary of how it began, and who were its founding team, and why they decided to actually begin this company in the first place?
Sure. Yeah. So Ctrip actually, the company was founded in 1999. So it was founded by, co-founded by four founders: James Liang, Fan Min, Jiqi, and Neil Sen. Right. So obviously, out of these four co-founders, a lot of them have made great strides in their career above and beyond Ctrip. So these co-founders, James and Chichi, they originally were classmates at Fudan University, right? Nielsen brought a finance background, right? Having worked at Deutsche Bank, and then Fan Min brought the travel kind of experience. So these guys, they were all Western educated, so they saw how travel is a big part of this Western society, and how travel has developed in these Western markets, right? So they saw a great opportunity to kind of bring that to China, right? And this is back in 1999. So obviously, Chinese, and in terms of how they consume travel, is very, very nascent, very traditional, offline, traditional agency package tours, right? So there was a great opportunity for them to to really build a business off of this, and they found this quite compelling, right? So each of them had kind of different roles. Obviously, James, Fanmin, and Jiqi more on the operational side. Neil focused on more capital raising, right? And initially in the early get go, we were able to kind of raise venture capital to help get the company going, right? Some of the earlier investors include like IDG and then Safe, SoftBank, were some of the earlier investors out there. So that's kind of how the team got started, and having the initial capital, very Silicon Valley based kind of venture capital funding to get the company going.
So Victor, things have changed a lot since the back when Ctrip was founded. I know it's a long story, but could you just give us the broad strokes on, when things started off, how was the environment, the competition, and the challenges for Chinese online travel market back then? And how was Ctrip able to win a market-leading position and grow so fast? Because you guys IPO'd really early. You were on the NASDAQ in 2003. So this is really one of the very early successful Chinese internet company listings, even before Baidu and Tencent. So how did we go from the founding to the IPO and this dominant position in travel?
Sure. So I think it was a very good time as well in the early 2000s, right? With growing wealth effect, people spending more on travel. I think, like I said, travel in China was very nascent. A lot of this was more in the traditional travel agency route. More package tour. There are just not a lot of alternatives to make travel booking easier, more price comparison easier, right? So I think from the early days, Ctrip position was more focused on the frequent independent traveler base of users, right? So what it kind of did in the very beginning, it was very rudimentary, was passing out VIP cards and flyers at targeted airports, train stations, offices to target this kind of white collar professional travel base. Right. So that was this kind of initial focus, a very targeted kind of user base that want to differentiate, right, with the frequent independent travelers. I think what it kind of did right also was, secondly, was to help enable kind of travel booking. So obviously, it's built a website to put travel information, flight information, hotel information that's made available to users. But I think in the early 2000s, these websites to enable transaction were still hard. So what Ctrip did was to build a call center, right? In the early days to facilitate and a lot of this kind of transactions. People may go to the website to look at the information, but then they wouldn't know how to book, so they could call the Ctrip hotline, and the call center person would help them facilitate, supplement the travel information and help them complete the booking, right? So those are some of the key kind of attributes in terms of how the business model was built upon to help it differentiate itself in the early days, right? A lot of we didn't, the company didn't really require users to prepay for these transactions like hotel. When they book a hotel to Ctrip, right? They could after their stay, then they pay the hotel, and then we work with the hotel to get the commission. So off of this kind of innovative foundation, right? We were able to scale very fast and grow our FIT kind of user base onto the platform, right? I think through the early days too, we also enable M&A to acquire many different kind of travel related companies to acquire the right licensing for us to be in compliance and also scale faster, right? So those are some of the kind of competitive things we laid in place. And we were growing super fast. So as a result, and in the early days, we were able to capitalize on the U.S. Capital markets. We listed on Nasdaq in 2003, right?
Yes, yeah, that's right. I mean, what you're describing there it seems so different from today, where back then, before 2003, the payments market. I mean, this is pre Alipay time in China, right? I don't think even Alibaba had Alipay up and running by then. The payments was really must have been a headache for a company, for an online travel company, where it makes a lot of sense where call centers would be a much better way to do it. The market back then, it's a desktop PC environment without any mature payment platforms in China, very different from today.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So you kind of have to understand, the market situation, and that's part of how Ctrip has sort of evolved and been continue to be successful in travel for almost 20 years now, right? Initially, a lot of the pre-transaction, information. And also the transaction part was more offline call center, right? It represented a large majority of the booking. But as mobile and payment evolved, right, we started pushing users to be more mobile centric. So today, if you look at Ctrip now, we're about over 80% of our transactions are actually through mobile. So very little, call center needs for pre-transaction or the transaction part. Now the call center is more focused on post-transaction, where if users run into trouble with their hotel booking, they book a hotel, but there's no room available. 24/7, they could call Ctrip at any time to resolve these issues. So the company has definitely evolved to stay ahead of the game, and that's why we're still in a leading position 20 years into the game. Yeah.
Sure. So if we look at things today in China, as we've already touched upon, there's been explosive growth in recent years for Chinese outbound global tourism. And how would you describe the Chinese travel market today? And how has that evolution broadly taken place over time? And how have travel habits changed? And maybe a little bit of how you think they're going to continue to change in the near future.
Sure. Like I said, I think travel is one of the fastest growing industries, whether in China or also globally, right? I think with disposable income, people, a lot of that spend goes into travel. It's nearly 10% of GDP for many countries, so it's a very, very big category. I think all travel related spend in China is, and this includes sort of, not just booking the flights and hotels, but, ground transportation, as well as trains, buses, and also in destination spend is a very big part in terms of shopping, F&B, local attractions. All of this spend in China is about 800 billion USD. Right, globally, travel is over 5 trillion. So it's very, very big TAM size. So I think particularly in China, right, if you look at China and having covered China, China's such a dynamic market too, right? Tier 1 kind of user base and tier 1 travel user base versus tier 2 versus say tier 4, I think is very different kind of in terms of their travel expectations is very different, right? Tier 1, I think you continue to see more travelers not just traveling in short haul, but more and more traveling long haul, right? Going to Europe, going to more exotic destinations, like polar travel. Has become a very, very hot destination, right? Chinese going to the North Pole or South Pole now is the second largest kind of consumer group now, right? So a lot of kind of tier 1 user base, frequent independent travelers looking for more and more unique destinations that they could share with their friends. You get into sort of tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities, right? They're still more package tour oriented, right? So going through. They could also go through Ctrip to book package tours to, more nearby destinations. Usually, Thailand and Japan are the top two kind of destinations for Chinese outbound travel. Right? There's over 10 million travelers going to Thailand last year, over 7 million going to Japan. So, I think the travel growth opportunity, within China obviously continues to be very big as GDP continues to grow. Travel is usually double. The travel industry grows double that of the GDP growth in China. But I think particularly of interest is the Chinese traveling overseas. That wave will continue to become bigger and bigger, right? As discussed, this Chinese travelers brought about 115 billion USD of spend last year already, and that's represented by less than 10% of the population. So that's only going to get bigger, and tier 1, tier 2 city travelers will travel to farther and farther destinations, right? Lower tier cities may be first time traveling, but they'll probably utilize more package tours to travel. So those are some dynamics out there, in terms of, there's a lot of destinations around the world that Chinese can tap into, right? We've seen, closer destinations. Of course, Thailand and Japan are the mainstream kind of population destinations, but we've seen destinations like Vietnam or Cambodia growing very fast, right? The Middle East is growing very fast, right? Longer haul destinations in Europe, like Eastern Europe, Czechoslovakia, is growing very fast. So a lot of this, there's many destinations for Chinese to travel to and consume, right? So in fact, I think a lot of more and more of these kind of countries and each country's kind of travel bureau are working with us to help market themselves and educate this growing Chinese travel base, why they should be going to XYZ destination and such, right? So yeah, I think the story and the opportunity continues to be very big and very, very exciting for us.
So I guess, I kind of want to go back to something that you mentioned a little bit before at the beginning of this conversation, looking at, the efforts that you guys are doing in terms of outbound. And so I'm kind of curious if you can explain a little bit more about that strategy. So when you're going outbound, when you're kind of creating your global strategy, are you looking more at how to better serve Chinese customers, or do you also kind of envision expanding your services for overseas customers as well?
I think it's a step-by-step process, but we envision all these steps, right? I think first and foremost is to continue serving the Chinese outbound well, right? To compete with and win Chinese outbound market share. I think first and foremost you need to have global supply chain, travel supply chain, made readily available for them. There needs to be comprehensiveness of choices, competitive pricing, right, and the quality of the inventory that you're putting in front of them. I think secondly, to compete on outbound, you need to have very strong service capabilities, right? I think Chinese traveling overseas do not speak foreign languages, and as in the case with travel, right, it's a very non-standard kind of purchase. You may have flight delays, you may have flight cancellation, you may check into a hotel and hotels don't have rooms, right? They could always kind of fall back to Ctrip through our 24/7 call center to kind of service them. So I think that outbound we have, core foundations in place to really effectively compete and win market share and outbound. So as you serve more Chinese outbound, it's sort of reinforcing. You're going to be able to, be able to tighten your relationship with global travel supply chain, right? Because you're bringing more business to them, and you could have better and better relationship with them. Then you're able to kind of give your consumer and user base better and better deals as a result. So that's sort of one point in terms of our global expansion, riding the Chinese outbound wave, and to continue solidifying our global supply chain power. Right. So through that, we have other more and more other initiatives and other brands that are helping build a non-Chinese user base. So in 2016, second half of 2016, we invested in a leading global flight meta search company called Skyscanner. It's an Edinburgh-based company. They've been around for quite some time and have established very, very good brand credibility with users looking for flight information, competitive price, flight routes, as well as get a good experience. So they built a very, very good model off of being the leading flight meta search company globally. So today they have about over 80 million active user base on the platform. So very, very large. And all of this kind of user base, I think, is non-Chinese users looking for flights. So that gives us a position of, a very big kind of non-Chinese user base through the meta search model that we could continue, growing off of, right? So that's a very much an important part of our overall international expansion strategy, more on the ex-China user base kind of front. Right. The team continues to be run independently. The brand continues to be operated under Skyscanner independently. So they've been growing very well since our investment in late 2016. So that will continue to grow. So that's another part of sort of our international strategy and opportunity we're capturing. This is more of top of the funnel sort of meta search model that we have positioned in. And then the third part in terms of our international is a company we acquired last year called Trip.com. It was a Silicon Valley based company. And it was a very small acquisition, but I think we really like the brand name, the domain name Trip.com. The association obviously is, not just flights, but it's the whole trip, right? Flights, hotels, ground transportation, and destination kind of capability. Similar to sort of, the philosophy of what Ctrip has built up in China, a one-stop shop, right? We want to have a brand that is more that Westerners, non-Chinese users can better associate with. So we bought this company called Trip.com to rebrand our international OTA business as Trip.com. So Ctrip continues to be the brand for Chinese users in China as a Chinese leading OTA. Trip.com would be for non-Chinese outside of China, currently mainly focused around Asia Pac. For Westerners looking for an OTA, right? So Trip.com is a small business today, but a fast-growing business that is also very much part of our international expansion strategy. I think the focus will be more focused on Asia Pac for the foreseeable future. So that's kind of in terms of thinking about international. There's kind of different buckets of this opportunity that we're positioned in to grow.
Yeah, I mean, certainly Trip.com is a great web domain. Well, I couldn't think of a better one. With Ctrip, the C stands for China. Is that actually? Come to think of it, I never even thought what the C stood for with Ctrip. Is that is that a correct assumption?
Yes, it could be China. It could be customer as well.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. Yeah, funny to think. I never thought what the C stood for. But anyway, let's go back and we can talk a bit more about the sort of typical customer journey. What is the process? Understanding how Chinese, when they say a Chinese family, for example, they're deciding to travel. What are the different online touch points and stages in China, because the whole online environment is so different, and how does Ctrip fit into this customer journey?
Yeah, China is a very dynamic and vast market. I think we probably need to break down China by different tier cities in terms of the sophistication of the travelers. So I think on one front, it's how to reach these users, right? More sophisticated users, a large majority of this user base are app-based relationship, right? They download the Ctrip app, and they can find information on the destination to get their inspiration. They can find a wide array of travel-related products, from flights and hotels to airport pickups to plane tickets if you're traveling intercity, right? To end destination kind of local attraction ticketing to restaurants, right? All through the app and can book through the app, right? So in terms of reach, our app is a main source of how we kind of service users. But increasingly, we've been increasing our reach through offline channels as well. Right. We acquired a company called Traveling Bestone last year. They're more of a offline agency, right? With having about 5,000 offline stores across 200 cities. So since then, we've expanded the number of stores to 7,000 stores now in China. So that's another way to kind of reach a very big kind of travel user base. So our strategy from the consumer front is really twofold, right? One front is through our mainstay of our app-based relationship. A lot of users download our app to, find information and book and through our platform. For first-time travelers or older kind of travelers, we now have over 7,000 plus offline stores across 200 cities in China to have more of a face-to-face kind of touch point capabilities to teach them about travel and giving them assurance that they will be well taken care of through booking through Ctrip, through a package tour, and just having that kind of offline face-to-face service capabilities is an important kind of differentiator to service these newer traveler base, right? So that's one front. And in terms of how we reach user base, obviously you need to have the products as well, right? So I think today, Ctrip in China is a one-stop shop, right? Over 60 products and services, anything and everything related to travel that we service a traveler user base. Right, you're looking for flights, very comprehensive, flight routes, packages, hotels. Right, we have one of the largest hotel inventories in the world now too. Right, hotels, we have about 1.3 million plus hotel chains available to choose from on our platform. Alternatively, we also are the biggest investor in Tujia, the Airbnb of China. So through them, we have another 1 million plus alternative accommodation choices for our user. Right, so the breadth and depth of and competitive price kind of products are an important differentiator to how you compete and offer users, right? That you can offer users. So beyond above and beyond that, I think Ctrip, as discussed, we also offer airport pickup services, right? Train ticketing services. We offer, once a user, because a lot of this user are app-based relationships. So a lot of users, once they're in destination, right, they could easily open our app and we could, through GPS system know their POI and recommend, what are local restaurants that are around your vicinity or, local attractions that are around your vicinity that users can kind of use our app to tap into to fulfill kind of in destination needs as well, right? So, on the 2C front, we have offline and online capabilities. On the supply chain front, many, the breadth of choices at competitive price across, all different kind of travel verticals that we can service the users. Yeah, I would say a large majority of it is through our app, right? So existing users having our app would more likely go through an app to find information and do a booking. We are also acquiring more and more new users, right? So one part of it is through other many online kind of performance channels as well, right? Through social platforms, through SEM, through app stores, through pre-installation and handsets, right? All the kind of different channels for us to, acquire new user base, right? That's something that we've been doing more of and penetrating more of. So that's more on the online, and then on the offline we have over 7,000 stores, right? So it's quite diversified in terms of new user base, how they're coming on. Typically, we would want them to kind of download our app. Right, so once we acquire this user base and then they download our app, the large majority of their how they're accessing Ctrip is through the app, right?
I think one of the final questions we've got, Victor, is just I guess some advice for people in the industry who are trying to target these Chinese outbound travelers. In your experience, what are some of the unique characteristics that we see from these groups? You've already mentioned that there's the different tiers in China. Lower tier city travelers are very different from Beijing, Shanghai. But how does this actually manifest itself in terms of the unique characteristics of these groups? What are they wanting from travel? What's important to Chinese travelers? And is there any ways that the travel industry outside China could be meeting these needs better?
Yeah. I think for one, I think there's a lot of choices for where Chinese can travel to, right? A lot of destinations, a lot of choices. So I think it's important that destinations or travel vendors need to find ways to market themselves and offer a compelling story why a Chinese should be traveling there, right? Through their platform. Right. So an interesting story would be sort of, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, outbound travel to Hungary picked up quite a bit last year, right? And that's and some parts off of sort of there's a Chinese soap opera that became really popular, and the soap opera background was filmed in Hungary. Right? So there's a lot of association with that, and just a natural way to kind of market the destination. So as a result, Chinese there was exposure with the Chinese consumers, and then travel to that destination pick up dramatically, right? So I think that's kind of one thing. I think oftentimes, especially frequent independent travelers, they're very last minute booking, unlike Western counterparts. Right, so a destination, a country that wants to attract more Chinese needs to make visa, application easier, faster, or once the Chinese apply for a visa, a longer tenure visa can help really capture a lot of this kind of travel too, right? Because this behavior is just very last minute, and if you have a visa ready, then you could just book a ticket and go, right? And that could be sort of incremental edge, right? I think in terms of sort of just making Chinese feel more, comforted. I think, one thing, the Chinese behavior, right? I think, and in a lot of Western countries, once you land in an airport or you go into restaurants, you're served a very icy glass of cold water, right? I think for Chinese, they prefer kind of warm water. And those are some things I think as we speak, we're working with many different kind of airports around the world to kind of say, how do you make Chinese feel more welcome and more personalized, right? It's these kind of nuances of just not only offering cold water, but also offering hot water, right? Because these behaviors are very different, right? That makes Chinese more feel welcome. So, those are, some broad examples of sort of, what within the travel supply chain, how companies can think about to better localize and optimize for this kind of wave of Chinese consumers.
Yeah, I think there's still a long way to go in many places. Even the basics of having, I think Chinese expect Wi-Fi wherever they go. Certainly, if you live in China, you sort of have that expectation, and when you go outside China, that isn't the case sometimes. I think that's pretty basic.
Exactly.
I had a friend actually who was complaining on Twitter just yesterday, Manya, one of our previous guests, about how in Holland union pay is surprisingly not very well accepted, and she had a Chinese friend there who had a problem. Most Chinese people only have union pay, and they couldn't find a place to take money out, and it was a real problem.
Yep, I think payment, yeah, enabling mobile payment, union payment options with when they're traveling overseas, I think is a very important facilitator as well to consumption.
Cool. Well, I think we've got through all the questions. Yeah, because the last one we've already covered, which was the rebranding of Ctrip. First of all, Victor, is everything okay so far? Have you got any? Is there anything else you want to add, question-wise, or anything you feel we should be covering that we haven't?
I think we've covered quite a bit of topics. Yeah, I think I'm good on my side. If there's anything that you guys need to clarify or reinforce, feel free to reach out.
Victor, if people want to find out more about Ctrip, where should they go online?
Just www.ctrip.com, or if they're a foreigner, www.trip.com.
Awesome. And really, thanks again for taking the time today. Really great to speak to you.
Thank you for having me.